Hello, everyone. I hope that you can hear, and if you can't, go ahead and just use the question box to send us any issues that you might be having, and we'll try to sort them out. I'm Dr. Sharon Milgram, and I'm usually would say I'm talking to you from the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, but today I'm talking to you from my home in Tacoma Park, Maryland, close to the NIH. And I'm really delighted that we have the opportunity to host an NIH-sponsored workshop for trainees, graduate students, and postdocs and research staff across the United States. These are really unprecedented times, filled with uncertainty and a lot of questions, not only about what's going to happen to ourselves and our families and our loved ones and people that we really care about, but also what's going to happen to our science and our ability to find a job or transition to graduate school. These are just really unusual times. And I think that it's important that we pause as a community and take some time to consider strategies that will help us be resilient throughout this process. And so here at NIH, we decided that we would try weekly, if not more than once a week, to offer a workshop that would be helpful for the broader community. And today we're really pleased to offer strategies and tools for dealing with stress during the coronavirus pandemic. And the workshop is delivered today by Lori Chaikin-McNulty, who is a clinical social worker, and she is also an NIH OITE wellness advisor. And Lori's been working with our office now for many years, thinking about ways that we can help scientists deal with stress and how to help our trainees become as resilient as possible in this very exciting but also difficult career. I want to just say before I turn the floor over to Lori that I know people are at home working and have extra time, and on our website, which is training.nih.gov, we have 80+ career videos available for watching. And so please visit our website and take advantage of those resources. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Lori, and I'm going to listen and learn as well. Thank you all for being here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori. Thanks for introducing me, Sharon. Like she said, I'm a clinical social worker. I have a private practice, and I've also been working with the OITE wellness team at NIH for several years, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time to sort of think together about these strategies and tools with me. So the first thing I want to do is have everyone just sort of take a collective deep breath. So this is a nice little comic that you can print out and put somewhere that might be a helpful reminder about how to take sort of really helpful deep breaths. So to inhale and feel your belly expand, and then to feel your chest expand after your belly. And then to take a pause and to exhale, feel your belly contract and your belly button move towards your spine. And then feel your chest contract after your belly, and then pause before breathing in again. So we know that deep breaths are extraordinarily helpful for our physiology, which then helps our, sort of psychological well-being. So we know that it affects different cortical regions, it affects our nervous system, and then it sort of helps us respond instead of react, which is sort of what we're thinking about today. And there's a reference if you want to learn more about the specifics of deep breathing. And the trick to this is to practice it. So practice it while you really need the deep breath, but also just practicing a little bit of deep breathing every day can make a big difference. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between anxiety and stress. So we use the word anxiety, and I will probably use it interchangeably to stress during this talk, but I want to just acknowledge that there is clinical anxiety, right? So that kind of the anxiety that I might have a diagnosis for in my practice. And that is more of a 6 months, really at least 6 months, very excessive worry to the point where it's getting in the way of what we want to do and what we need to do. Versus when we say, oh, I'm anxious about this or I'm stressed about this. I want to make sure that we're sort of differentiating and respecting that. But but I will probably use the words anxiety and stress because anxiety in itself is a feeling as well as a clinical indicator. I also want to think about that word stress. So stress is our reaction to the presence of a stressor, right? And it's not always a negative reaction. Sometimes stress can be motivating. Eustress, is the term for it. And I have this picture of this lion and this guy. This guy does not seem particularly stressed out, but it might help him to be a little more motivated by his stress. So there are times when we are moved forward by the presence of stressors, but there are also times when stress inhibits us or becomes anxiety. And so I want to think about, when does stress become distress? So this is actually from the National Research Council, and this is from examples from lab animals, but I think it really highlights what's going on for us, which is stress is that real or perceived perturbation to an organism's physiological homeostasis or psychological well-being. Basically, when we see a stressor, it's either this real or perceived threat to our homeostasis. So then what do? We try to regain our homeostasis. So we have behavioral reactions, and some helpful and some unhelpful, right? Getting angry, trying to control things, avoiding, shutting down. Some more healthy, self-soothing, taking deep breaths, interacting with others, taking breaks. And I think everybody knows those physiological symptoms of stress as well. So we activate the sympathetic nervous system, the stress hormones kick in. And so what moves us from stress to distress is when our our stressors outpace our coping abilities. So when we have this stress and our coping that can't quite catch up to it. And that's when we have distress. And I think that's a lot what we're seeing with this pandemic. Both our internal and our external resources are struggling to keep pace with the stress. So that's when we feel overwhelmed. That's when we start to feel that sort of more classic anxiety and those worries. So from the research, we know what shifts us from stress to distress. Well, the duration of the stressor, the intensity of it, how predictable or unpredictable it is, how much control we have over it. And the intolerance of uncertainty is also something that we see happens when we get anxious. We sort of struggle to tolerate the uncertainty. So if you think about it, right, how long is this going to last? How bad is it going to be? Can we predict anything about it? Do we know the medications are going to come out? Do we know when the vaccines are going to come out? What's this going to mean for my career, my family? So all of those things, all of these things that move us from stress to distress are present. And, you can sort of see from the blue box that if an animal can predict the onset or the duration, then that helps. So you could see why this would be a particularly unprecedented, really tough time. So I want to think about, what do we do when our resources are not keeping up with their stressors? What do we do when we're in distress? Well, oftentimes what we try to do is we use our mental models. And Peter Senge is a system scientist at MIT, and he talks a lot about mental models. And if you take a look at his quote, these are beliefs that we hold about the world. These are images of how to deal with things. They're models in our brain, and oftentimes they're not conscious. They're not at our thought level. We're not always aware of them. We just sort of know how things are going to play out. So if you think about a stressor, we usually have a mental model to say, how am I going to handle that, right? So the first time your car battery dies, you don't know what to do, and you sort of maybe are overwhelmed or panic. And now the fifth time, I call AAA, it'll be $100, no big deal. So we don't have a mental model yet to deal with this. So we're all trying to make our own mental models. And the data that we're getting to sort of try and create these models is changing, if not by the day, but almost by the minute or by the hour. And so then our brain works double time to try to create these models. So this is an unprecedented time. So like we said, stress and distress is when we can't quite get back to homeostasis. So our brain creates a lot of scenarios to try to get us back to homeostasis, particularly when we can't do physical things to control what's happening, which is where you might get your racing thoughts and your sort of difficulty getting off that thought wheel. the other sort of thing to know is that our brains are wired for a negative bias, meaning that a lot of our scenarios are going to be a little bit more worst case and maybe cause more anxiety and stress. So it's important evolutionarily for our brains to be negatively biased. It's more important for me to remember there's a danger, right? Like there's that cave where a lion popped out yesterday, than it is for me to remember, oh, there's a nice apple tree, I like that, right? Our brains are wired to sort of find that. So, but now when we don't have lions popping out at us, but we have the proverbial lions, we are looking probably more for that negative bias. So it takes a little bit of work to overcome that. And remembering for ourselves that new things, even really good things, make us feel stressed and anxious. I mean, what's more joyous than a wedding? What's more stressful than a wedding? Change, even the change we want, even the change we ask for, even starting a new grad school, starting our dream job, it's stressful. So when newer stressful situations arrive, we use those mental models to think through the situation, and we're still kind of looking to create that for this particular situation. So let's think about what are our current stressors that we're having to manage. And I doubt that I got them all, but these are the ones that came up in talking and being in the community. So the uncertainty of it, what's going to happen with the virus, what's going to happen with the medication, what's going to happen with the hospitals, my job. There's a lot of uncertainty, and tolerating uncertainty is incredibly challenging. And we're going to talk about a strategy for that. There's a scarcity stressor. I mean, I think probably the most publicized one is toilet paper, paper towels, paper products. But there's a scarcity. Am I going to have enough food when I go to the grocery store? Am I going to be able to get what I need? Which also interferes with our sense of community. When there's scarcity, we struggle to have a sense of community sometimes. How do I balance my work and my family? How do I make sure that I'm healthy and safe, and that my loved ones are healthy and safe? What about my finances? What about my job security? Is my PhD going to get pushed back? Is my postdoc going to get extended? Are people going to think that I'm not doing anything in these 3 months? So our job security and our expectations from supervisors, that's probably a stressor, because the supervisors are also in a boat where they don't have a mental model for this. So they're working to create their own expectations, and then so that then comes down onto trainees. Impacts on the future, impacts on our career. Am I going to lose those 3 months of science that I did? Are the mice going to die? How is this going to impact my applications for jobs, for grad school, for interviewing? Right, so that's a huge stressor we're hearing. The unpredictability of this is a stressor. When is it going to end? How long is it going to go on? What's going to happen? When are we going to see a peak? The helplessness. So I'm hearing helplessness in terms of, people, you're scientists because many people want to be able to help. They want to be able to come up with things, and feeling like, well, this is my area, but I can't help in this very great time of need. Feeling isolated, especially if you live alone, or especially, if you're far from your home, that can be an incredible stressor. We know research-wise, we know the effects of isolation on mental health can be quite challenging. Decision fatigue is something that I've been thinking a lot about, because you're having to make all these new decisions, and there's not a clear right and wrong for many of them. Do I need to go to the grocery store today? Do I really need milk? Do I call this person? Do I send an email? So we're making all these new decisions. What do I do with my science? Should I check on it? It's a lot of decisions to make. And in that, there's a lack of control, which is also anxiety producing. And if we already have anxious tendencies, we tend to try and control the things we can. And with a lack of control, that becomes a big challenge. There's information overload from media, and that's actually one of our strategies to think about how do we pull back from that. Just onslaught of information that we tend to be getting. Disappointments, cancellations. Maybe there's a conference that you really wanted to go to. Maybe there was something that you were hoping to put on your CV. That can be really disappointing. and even not work related. You're looking forward to a trip home or to a visit or to another round of interviews. So disappointments and cancellations are a big thing. And with that changes, like we talked about, changes and productivity. I think that the expectations we have for ourselves for productivity are needing to shift. And some people feel like they need to be more productive because they're not seeing people, so they need to show that they're being productive. Some people are having trouble being productive. Sometimes our anxiety gets in the way of productivity, or, hey, I just worked for, like I said, X number of months on this project, and now it's not going to bear its fruits. The length of the isolation, so duration, we talked about as a stressor. Differences in beliefs is another big stressor. So what if your roommate and you have a differing belief of how much should you go out? How clean do we have to be? Some people are feeling like people are coming down on them really hard if they feel like they need to go to the grocery store, and other people are wondering why people around them are not being more protective or more cautious. And I'm sure there are other stressors, but that's just, not a light list, but it's a long list of stressors, right? So we think about that, and we want to come up with some resilience, as Sharon said. So there are a lot of models of resilience, but essentially resilience is our bounce back factor. How are we able to sort of manage these tough times and come back and have grit through them? And this is just one model. Mayo Clinic has a great information on resilience, but I think sometimes we think about resilience as like you put your head down and you keep moving, when in reality, it requires a lot of these domains. So how are we regulating our emotions? How are we interacting with other people? Can we shift our vision and shift our purpose and shift our goals in this time? How can we physically take care of ourselves? So it's important to think about resilience in this time. And we're going to go through, I think it's 11 strategies for the kind of more practical applications of what do I do if I'm not feeling really resilient, and how do I manage the stress in this time? So the first strategy is setting boundaries, setting healthy boundaries. And first of all, I think we're all trying to set healthy physical boundaries. This is more about setting healthy emotional boundaries. So boundaries are thoughtful and intentional ways of setting limits with others and with ourselves, with the aim of preserving and enhancing our mental health. So basically, how do you set limits with other people, and how do you set limits for yourself to keep yourself mentally healthy and reduce stress in this time? So I just want to be clear that this is a new situation. So boundaries that you have had in the past that may have really worked for you might work now, but they may also require tweaking, right? Because I think a lot of people say work is work and home is home. Well, now work is home. So we are needing to sort of set and think about our boundaries and make sure that they're working for us. And I will have a strategy on how to separate work from home. So the first thing is media consumption boundaries. And you'll see the guy here, our guy on our slide, is getting sucked into his phone. He's having trouble separating from his phone and the media consumption. So how do we set boundaries with how much time we're spending reading things, how many articles we're seeing, how sucked into sort of the clicking from thing to thing, the negative news, the press conferences, how much media consumption? I think that, most people in this field want to stay informed, but is there a point at which it becomes too much for you? And there's one of the strategies is sort of how to think about that. So setting boundaries on our work demands. How fast do you want to respond to emails? How much time on the screen can you do? Is there a point where you can say, I am going to stop work at 4 o'clock because that's when I usually leave. And if I need to answer emails for an hour later, I will, but I'm going to take a walk. So setting pretty clear boundaries, and also boundaries with our families and friends. I often wonder as scientists, especially in this time, especially if you're in virology or infectious diseases, if people are coming to you a lot for questions and answers and you want to feel helpful, is there a way to put up a boundary around that if you're not feeling comfortable? If you're happy to answer it, then right, boundaries are about preserving our mental health. So if it's not working for you, to say something along the lines of, I really appreciate that you're curious about this. I actually don't have the answers for this one either. It's confusing. Or, hey, I don't want to talk about that right now. Can you send me a picture of your kid or something, like just, casual. But thinking about those boundaries with our families and friends, and also which family and friends we can go to if we are needing support. Thinking about our routines and our schedules and keeping boundaries with that. Saying no if we feel like we can, if it's possible. If there's I can't do this today, but I can do it tomorrow, or can I get that to you by close of business this week? Can we set boundaries? Because I think particularly right now, we feel like, well, people can't see that I'm working, so I have to do extra. Setting boundaries around checking. So when I say checking, I mean checking the news, checking the stats, checking to call your pharmacy a million times, checking your doctors, checking on your family members. Just the constant feeling like when we don't have control, oftentimes what we start to do is we start to do checking. And that is exhausting oftentimes, because we get a little hit of dopamine when we check, things are good, and then we start to get anxious again, so we feel like we have to check, and then we sort of get into a cyclical pattern of really like needing to check. Can we self-soothe in other ways so we don't feel like we're constantly in a cycle of having to check on everything around us? Also, setting rules for ourselves is the last way I think setting boundaries can be really helpful. So I talked about decision fatigue. You're making a lot of decisions every day now, and decisions you haven't had to make before with maybe not as much information as you would like. So setting rules, like I'm going to set my boundary and I'm going to go to the grocery store once and I'm going to get 2 weeks of groceries. Or I am okay ordering takeout once a day. Or whatever it is, the rule that you feel like works for you can be really good, and tweak them, change them. If it's not working, that's okay. You don't have to say, well, I set this rule, I'm sticking to it. Or saying, I will answer, an email within 30 minutes, but I don't feel like I have to respond immediately. Take my phone with me everywhere I go, even if I'm having lunch. So setting rules for ourselves. The second strategy is controlling what we can. This is an interesting one and a tough one. So in this situation, I like to think that there's things we cannot control, there's things we wish to control, and there's things that we can control. So things we can't control, right? The way others are responding, the speed at which the vaccine is being made, the duration of the self-isolation. And then there's things we wish to control. Oftentimes, red and yellow blend together, right? We want to control oftentimes the things we can't. But the behavior of others, how frequently your parents or your family members or your loved ones are going out into the world. The behavior of others also that you don't know. So, if people in the world, people in media, your interactions with others. So sometimes we can't control the way that other people interact with us, or if other people are stressed, the way that they are dealing with their stress. We can't control that, but we wish to, right? I wish that they wouldn't lose it, or I wish that they would stay inside. The length of the isolation, we want to sort of have some semblance of control, the duration. And then there's the things we can control. So these are things that we have a realistic shot of managing. So I say realistic shot because even the things in our green circle sometimes feel a little out of our control, and we don't want to be too hard on ourselves if we feel like we can't wrap our brains around them, but we can control our own thoughts and our own behavior. Now, I think particularly the thoughts at this point that can feel a little bit more in the red, but we can practice, and particularly helpful in controlling our own thoughts is talking to other people that we trust. We can try and control our reactions to other people. So we can't control their reactions to us, but we can choose how we respond. And we can also control our routines and our boundaries. So thinking about the things we can control, because we can really get wrapped up in the red and yellow, and then that leads to more anxiety. So the yellow category, right, the things we wish to control, those tend to be the things that make us feel more anxious, because they leave us feeling maybe more hopeless or more helpless, especially if you're a helper by nature. And they're the ones we spin around in our head. How long is my postdoc going to get extended? Will it get extended? What will happen to my projects? What is my PI thinking? What is the administration going to do? Those are those things that we don't have a lot of control over, but we spin them around in our heads a lot, and they are the ones that tend to give us the worry. So every person in this entire situation is having things that they can't control, but there are things you can. So learning that difference and spending your energy on the things that you can control is a big part of anxiety management. So controlling what we can. So thinking about, like, what are our fears? So we can find our thoughts running on a hyperdrive, and it can be almost even a challenge to get down to the core fear. And so thinking about, you know, our brains think a lot. That's what it does. It goes from thing to thing to thing to thing, especially if we're anxious. But figuring out what is actually the worry. Is the worry that how long am I going to be alone? Or is the worry what's going to happen to my funding? And then thinking about, okay, if that's the real fear, what part of that do I have agency over? And sometimes we get stuck because we think I have agency over none of it, and we get totally stressed out. And what happens when we get stuck is oftentimes our thoughts become unhelpful. And we kind of ignore all of the possibilities that we have control over, and we focus on the ones that we really wish we could control. And so for that, the strategy is sort of trying to come up with some helpful thoughts. So CBT is one of the most well-researched psychological interventions for anxiety. In fact, is one of the founders of it. And so it's very simply put, in its most basic form, we start with thoughts. So we have thoughts that then impact how we feel, which then impacts what we do. So if a thought, an unhelpful thought, is my CV is ruined because my postdoc ends, people are going to think I didn't do anything for the last 3 months. We feel panicked, we feel stressed, we feel angry and sad and overwhelmed. And so sometimes our coping isn't the best, right? We stay in bed, or we isolate, or we avoid the emails from the PI, or whatever, way we can sort of manage that. Versus a more helpful thought would be, everyone is having to stop right now. And I think this is pretty easily explainable to my next employer. Well, there was a pandemic. Everyone is affected by this. I wish it was different. I really wouldn't prefer it this way, but I can only focus on the things that I can do for now. You still are going to feel uneasy, and that's okay. You're going to feel uncomfortable still, but you might feel a little more relieved, or you might feel motivated, right? So then you might have a little bit more of healthy coping and working on what we can. There are a lot of types of unhelpful thoughts, and these are a few that we might see in this time. If you want to look this up, they're called automatic negative thoughts in the model of cognitive behavioral therapy. But the types of unhelpful thoughts that might come up that we have to be mindful of are all or nothing thinking. So either all my mice are going to die and all my work is lost, and I spent the last 3 months doing nothing productive, or I'm going to be able to, totally do my experiment. Is there something in between? Or my CV is completely ruined because I didn't get to go to this conference, or I go and my CV looks great. Is there something in between? Is there something gray that's not so black and white? Catastrophizing, I think that it's almost hard to put on here, because I think we are in a catastrophe, so it is very easy to catastrophize. But if you think about your particular situation and you zoom in, imagining that the worst is going to happen, you're not going to get extended, you're not going to get that grad school that you were hoping for, sort of zooming in and saying, like, because of this, all of the worst case scenarios are going to happen. I think that we're all thinking that right now, because it's terrifying what we're seeing. But to think, is my particular worry a catastrophe, or is there a more modulated way to think about it? Mind reading is a really interesting one. I'm hearing a lot about mind reading because we are making assumptions about what someone else is thinking. So I didn't respond to that email, so my boss must think that I'm not doing anything. Maybe. Or maybe they don't expect you to respond to an email in 10 seconds. But the best way to deal with mind reading is to, if it's possible, to talk to somebody, Or you can talk to like the person that you're worried about, or you can talk to a friend and say, I don't know, what do you think about this? Fortune telling, so predicting what's going to happen. I think we're all trying to do that because, again, we're all trying to make our mental models of what's going to happen here. Discounting the positive. So like I said, our evolutionary bias is to look for the negatives to keep ourselves safe, but then that means that we're sort of ignoring all the positive evidence. And overgeneralizing, so taking one negative thing that has happened, so maybe you got like, 10 emails from your PI saying like, thanks so much, talk to you later, and you get one that says, hey, I need you to do this differently. We tend to overgeneralize and focus on that one negative. So is there a way to shift our thoughts to more helpful thoughts in this really challenging time, particularly when we get stuck or really overwhelmed? Then I want to think about setting reasonable and realistic expectations. I would say that most people are scientists, especially higher in the field, because they have high expectations for themselves. That's how you get where you get. That's how you get there. But maybe we need to be thinking about our expectations for this time period, given the context. So instead of expecting everything you were doing before, maybe there's a shift in expectations. So I have expectations for yourself, for your career, and for your family. So these are, I can't sort of say what are reasonable expectations for you, but to ask yourself these questions and say, hey, is this something I could look at? Because what I'm hearing is a lot of, I should be doing this, I should be doing this, I should be doing this. And it's demotivating. We feel like, oh, I'm not doing anything. So can we shift our expectations during this time? And if you look at all these questions, there are just different ways to start thinking about, can I get as much done as I was hoping to in these months or weeks? How fast can I answer emails? How much of my time am I really expecting myself to be productive? And what happens if I'm less productive than I was hoping to be? Can I shift my priorities? Can it be about family a little bit more, if that's possible? Can I change my definition of what productive is? These are strange times. Can I shift what it means to be productive? And I think that a lot of times, particularly in our society, we think of productivity as sort of like, if I'm not productive, then I'm going to get in trouble or I'm not going to feel valuable. Are there other ways to sort of think about that? Is if you're a little bit less productive because of the circumstances, does that have an impact on your value? And I think that's where we all struggle with sort of shifting our productivity, is because we want to still be helpful and valuable, but are there maybe other ways to be helpful? Is it reasonable that I'm going to feel quite as useful as I did when I was in the office for 8 to 12 hours a day? How do my expectations align with my supervisor's expectations? So if you sort of want to keep going through these, how much can I reasonably expected to help the anxiety of other people while I'm working on my own stress? Can I adjust? And also, can I remember that everyone globally is going through this with me? And the people who are in charge, the PIs, the universities, they're working on solutions. They're working on it, and you're not alone in it, and you're not expected to solve it all. Our expectations for our family. So what can I really expect of myself? How much pressure should I put on myself as a parent, as a sibling, as a partner or spouse, as an adult child, as a friend? So there's a lot of expectations coming from a lot of different directions. What feels reasonable and doable to you and your mental health? How much can I expect from other people? If my spouse is annoying me, or my parents aren't listening, or how much can I expect from other people? How much time, if you have children, how much time do you give to your children and your career at the same time? It's a tricky balancing act. What are my expectations for myself when I'm parenting right now? How calm can I be? How involved am I? What are the reasonable expectations when everything is sort of all in the same place? How can I best solve conflicts given the stress I'm feeling? What boundaries do I need to say? And I like this one. What would you say to a friend right now? So if your friend called you and they said like, ugh, I'm being the worst partner right now, I'm screaming or whatever, what would a friend say to you? They might actually be like, yeah, me too. This is really hard. And if you're having trouble figuring out what a friend would say, maybe find a friend that might be able to soothe those expectations a little. And then for ourselves, right? Should I be taking on new challenges now? So there's a lot of information. Do this plank challenge or start this new diet. This is a great time to learn an instrument or a language. Like, well, maybe this is just a good time to like try and be mentally healthy. Maybe intense and new exercise routines or challenging diets or big home renos. Maybe that's not on your docket, and maybe that's okay if there's other things going on. Can I remember that this is not permanent? And it might be longer than we prefer, but it will pass. And if I change my expectations now, that doesn't mean that I have to keep them changed in the future. The expectations can be fluid. And if I say, you know what, today I'm so stressed out, I need to watch Netflix for a few hours, maybe even tomorrow, maybe you can change your expectations, but is it okay to be kind to yourself in that? And also, people are talking about a schedule. I think schedules are really helpful if they are helpful for you. But if I don't feel like I'm sticking to my schedule exactly, is that okay? And can I have differing expectations about that? So you can see that reasonable expectations as a baseline foundational theme are about being kinder to yourselves the way you would be kind to a friend. Separating work from home. So work from home, now work is home. It's very hard to separate. So if you can physically separate your workspace from your home space, that's great. I know not everybody has that option. So if you can physically separate that workspace, and if you can't, can you make it as comfortable as possible? So people are having back issues and headaches from screen time. Can you make things as comfortable as possible for yourself? Can you separate it? Can you not do it on your bed? Or if you have to, how do you set time? This is my work time and this is my home time. I log off at 4. And I think one of the most helpful things, particularly if you're in a small space, is what I call it sensory separations. So physically, in a sensory way, changing from work to home and home to work. So going for a walk. I know a lot of people who are doing a fake commute. So they're walking around the block and then they're coming into work. That helps a lot of people. And then they do it again. So they walk around the block and they come back to home. Going for a walk in and of itself is nice to be outside. If that's a possibility for you where you live, to be outside and physically distance. Cooking is a sensory activity that sort of shifts our gears, or painting or artwork. Can you, at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, take a shower? Can you change your clothes? Even if you're in comfy clothes already, can you change your clothes at the end of your work day to your home clothes? Can you shut off your computer? So not closing the lid, but maybe turning it off so it's harder to get back on. That's a possibility for you. And if possible, when you do decide to take a break or to be done for the day or the weekend or whatever it is, can you turn off the pings? Can you turn off the alerts? Because it is just, it's so tempting to sort of keep looking, keep looking, keep looking. Is that an option for you? Would that work for you? And it's not an option for everybody, but it might be something that could be helpful. So reducing information overload. So I think it feels like an involuntary onslaught of information. But I want us to be mindful that there are choices to be made about our consumption of media right now. So asking ourselves, after I check the news, how do I feel? And I think most people would probably say not so great. And then saying, how long is it taking me to recover? Can I read a few articles and feel okay in 10 minutes? Or am I taking hours to recover? And am I getting sucked in for hours? I think as scientists, people want to be informed as human beings, right? That's part of what we can control, is how much we know. So that we think will reduce our anxiety, but it's a scale, and there's a tipping point at which I have information and it reduces my anxiety versus I have too much information and it's increasing my anxiety. And every person has to find that right balance on the scale for you. And also it's going to change and shift. So instead of overconsumption, Can you do immediate diet where you choose where you're getting your information from? So I think probably most scientists are already looking at reliable sources, but choosing, there's certain papers maybe that you read that every time you open X paper, you feel a little more anxious. So maybe there's certain places that, don't cause as much anxiety. Choosing how often you want to check. So I only watch the 6 o'clock news, or I'm only going to check it, at 3 p.m. because if I start reading it at 7, I can't sleep. Choosing who you talk to about the article. So there's people who make us feel better when we speak to them, and people who make us, who rev us up. Are there people who you can say, like I said before, can we talk about something else? Or like, you won't believe what I made for dinner last night. Can you talk about articles with people who maybe don't rev that anxiety part up in us? And also, if you need to, asking people around you to sort of slow down on what they're sending you. Right? If you can't resist and somebody sends you an article and it's so hard not to open it, can you set a boundary and say like, hey, I got my, this stresses me out. Like, I got it. I'm going to look into it, but I appreciate you sending it to me, but it's too much at the moment. Strategy 7 is managing stress of differing beliefs. This is a big thing that I've been hearing about a lot, is different people with different beliefs. So both in our home and out of our home. So what can I do if the people I live with have different beliefs about self-isolation than I do? So the first thing is there's some practicality in that. Like, are there cleaning routines that can help you feel comfortable? So can you have a discussion or a meeting and you say, hey, I know you're going to work still because you have to, or hey, you went to the grocery store 3 times this week, maybe just go once. But when you get home, can you take your shoes off? Can you put them in a basket? Do you mind changing your clothes and taking a shower? Because this is scary to me. Is there some compromise? And which battles do you pick? If you are feeling like you need a little bit more support, there might be some support from your universities, especially. Something to think into about like support for that anxiety, but also, everyone has different housing situations, but it could be something to ask about. So really thinking about which battles can I pick and how can we compromise on this, because we're not all going to see it the exact same way. And how do I clean my space and wash my hands and do my thing so that at least I feel comfortable in a particular space in my home. And then the other thing I'm seeing is that it's really upsetting to watch the news and see people with differing beliefs than us on the news. And so what can you control? We talked about media consumption. Maybe you want to volunteer. Maybe you want to write a blog. Maybe you want to do something where you feel like if you're able to sort of do a little part of something to feel like you have some power over that. So a few more, like I said, there's 11. So the next one is tolerating uncertainty. This is really hard, and actually there's a lot of research that this is particularly hard when we're feeling anxious. So stress is expected in this time. Of course, this is unprecedented. We do not have a mental model. So we need to be mindful of what overwhelms us to the point of getting in the way of what we want to do and what we need to do. So in order to sort of help with the uncertainty, there are a few things we can try to do, and it comes back to control. You can see these themes are sort of interconnected. We can focus on our daily routines, and I think really writing down what we intend to do can be powerful, and there's some research to back that up. So, but then also being kind to yourself if you don't get to everything on the routine, and trying not to overconsume media. I think this next one's really important, doing at least 1 or 2 things every day that help us feel calm. So if there's something to prioritize, if yoga helps you, but it's hard to get yourself motivated, how do you prioritize that? Can you go for a walk? Can you FaceTime a friend while you're walking? Is cooking something that's soothing to you? Can you look at a recipe or look in the fridge and type in the ingredients you have and see a good recipe? So because a lot of us are on overdrive, doing a few things that soothe us, talking to other people, and we have a whole section on talking to other people, but when we are feeling uncertain, usually other people have the same worries and the same uncertainties. So sort of talking about that with people who are helpful, knowing that this is going to pass. So the uncertainty is incredibly uncomfortable, and it will pass, and we will see the other side of it. And I think the uncertainty of what the other side is going to look like is in and of itself a stressor, but knowing that there will be a next step to this. The other thing with uncertainty is sometimes we feel like when we're uncertain, we lose agency. So are there volunteer opportunities? Are there command centers you can, help, or can you make things, or can you donate, or can you write, like I said, can you write blogs? So are there places to volunteer, or even helping a friend, or even helping an elderly person, or whatever it is, little things that you can do can sort of help with that feeling of uncertainty, because then you feel like you have a little more agency. The rest and relax. I like these little cartoons about the warrior pose. So giving ourselves permission to relax. So what I talked about in terms of productivity and value, oftentimes we struggle to allow ourselves to relax and rest because we are so worried about feeling productive, and we are worried about losing time, and that, like, we really struggle to let ourselves relax. So maybe giving yourself some permission around that, because these are hard times. The other thing that's important is to sort of know the difference between relaxing, that makes us feel better, and numbing out. So you can see the couple on the left seems to be relaxing. The guy on the right maybe numbing out. We know the difference between those two, like oh, I really like this show, I'll watch 1 or 2 episodes on Netflix, or what we all do, which is, oh, it's 7 hours later. How did that happen? I feel like a couch potato. So sort of being mindful of scheduling the times to relax without stretching them out so much that they actually make us feel sort of icky afterwards. There's a list of different ways to sort of think about self-soothing and distracting activities, reaching out and connecting with others. So we aren't alone. So I like this comic of social distancing. I want to think about the difference between social distancing and physical distancing. And I know social distancing is the term that we're using as public health. But maybe if that's a challenge for you and you're feeling particularly isolated, think about physical distancing and socially connecting using our technology to our advantage. So having game nights, or virtual meetups, or FaceTiming, or emailing, or writing letters, so you can feel a little more connected to the helpful friends and family that you have, and also, reaching out to your student health resources, your EAP. A lot of private therapists are working through telehealth now. There's HIPAA compliant video and audio and insurance. This is something that you can submit for. So this is something to think about if this is particularly a hard time. SAMHSA's helpline is there. And also in knowing that you're not alone, that everyone is aware of this. So the higher ups in your organizations are also aware of it, and people are working on it. And if nothing else, this actually comes from the ACEs study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study run from Kaiser, which is a massive tens of thousands of people thinking about adverse childhood experiences and sort of what helps with resilience in those adverse experiences. Sleep. So these 6 things are what comes up as helping with resilience. Sleep. So we know, I think people generally are aware, sleep routines, turning your electronics, meditating. If your worries are swirling around, you can write them down. I also think it's important to know that if you want to shift your sleep routine, changing it 10 minutes at a time is really helpful. So if you've been going to bed at 2 a.m. and waking up at 11, and you think, I need to really shift that, I got to go to bed at 10. Don't try to go to bed at 10 the next night. Your body is going to not be able to adjust that quickly. So you can just do it 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a time. So if you've been going to bed at 2 a.m., maybe tonight try to go to bed at 1:45 and try that for a few days. And so sort of slowly shifting back. Again, that's also about our expectations. Exercises, there's all these free classes online, walk, be gentle on yourself in this way. Do what makes you feel rejuvenated. Nutrition. This is a tough one too. I think a lot of people, people are either, too stressed to eat it or stressed and so are eating unhealthily, but thinking about your nutrition and how that connects to your body, and also your immune system. Those are critical pieces. Being mindful. So recognizing our feelings without judging them. That's what mindfulness is basically, is one part of it. So instead of how do I feel, or thinking about how do I feel instead of how should I feel. So, I shouldn't be so upset. I'm so lucky. At least I have a place to live. At least I have food. Yeah, but being hard on yourself for feeling upset doesn't make you feel better. So thinking about, this is how I feel, and that's okay. Helps us move through our feelings. Thinking about our healthy relationships, we talked about that a lot already, and then mental health, reaching out. So these are the 6 things that come out of adverse childhood experiences studies that help us with our resilience. So these are uncertain times, and it's unprecedented, and we're all just trying to make a mental model for it. So distress is going to be expected, and being kind to yourself and thinking about the things you can do to support your resilience, and also to and think about your expectations. The way you would talk to a friend can be really calming. Focusing on the green circle, so what can we control each day or each hour or each minute, really, and also finding the things that soothe you and prioritizing them in your schedule can be really useful as we're sort of going through this time. So I appreciate you guys listening, and I think that I will take questions now.
So everybody, to help with the questions, what I want you to do is go in and use the question box. And so first, before I take the first question, I just want to thank Lori. I feel actually a little calmer than when we started. So thank you very, very much. So ironic that you said about the new things, don't take on a home renovation, since that is one of the things that for us has gotten lost in the coronavirus. So helpful to hear you talk about all of that. So the first question is around navigating friendships when there's differences in how each friend views social distancing, how to find ways to say, I really want to follow the recommendations closely, even though you don't, and still maintain your friendship.
Right. So I guess it would depend if you live with this friend or if you don't live with this friend. There are going to be differences. We have differences with our friends all the time, and we are comfortable with those differences, but usually we are not worried that those differences are going to impact our physical health, which then I think oftentimes leads to a lot of anxiety. So thinking about, is this a friend that you're close enough to that you can have an honest discussion with them and say, this makes me feel really worried, and for my sanity, I need to follow this, and you do you, but this is what I need to do, especially if you don't live with them. You can also say, like, is this something you want to talk about? Or you can ask them questions and be curious, and I find that curiosity oftentimes disarms defensiveness. So, like, I don't know, what are you thinking? Like, what are you worried about? Like, do you worry when you go to the grocery store? Because I worry. And so if you can be curious, you can kind of disarm defenses and maybe have an open discussion. If you live with them, that's a little bit harder, of course. So picking what battles can you pick? And if you can't control another person's actions, but potentially you can request, like I said, things that might make you feel a little more comfortable in terms of your cleaning and your washing, and knowing that you are not alone, that if you look up articles about this, and particularly there's a lot of articles right now about friends, but also partners, romantic partners, about this is a major issue, and people are having to pick their battles and be a little bit kinder to each other about it in these stressful times.
Great. I'm going to read this one exactly. What if you know these tips, but when it's in the moment, your feelings are so intense that you don't give a shit and just perpetuate the feeling?
Right. Well, that's what stress does. Usually stress wins out, and these things take practice. So first of all, I think that everyone is feeling like this. If you find your body so amped up that what you said is you don't give a shit, if you find yourself so amped up, I find that the best thing to do is try and get your physical body, your physiological responses a little bit calm. Then your prefrontal cortex can come back online, right? Because at that point, your amygdala has taken over. So what can you do to soothe your body in those moments? So can you take some deep breaths? Can you lay down and put your feet up against the wall? Can you take a shower? Can you have a snack? Can you go for a walk? Can you call a friend? Can you get your body, your physiological, the cortisol, can you get it down enough? And actually there's research, right, that if you take a lot of deep breaths, your lungs will send messages back up to your brain to bring it back down. And then once your body is a little bit calmer, the physiological responses come back or calm, then your prefrontal cortex can come back online. And then you can think about the strategies.
Thank you. There's a set of questions all in the same vein, and that they relate around how to satisfy research and thesis advisors and PI's expectations. And rather than having Lori answer that, I'll let you know, or though maybe she'll answer a little bit, I'll let you know that next week we'll be offering a workshop, Becoming a Resilient Scientist, and I will talk a lot about assertive boundary setting with PIs and bosses. But Lori, you may have a few general things to add to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, my hunch is that the workshop will be probably expansive on that. I think that it's really hard when people's expectations conflict. And I wonder if there are resources, either people you trust in the lab or just resources at your university also to help with that. But I think probably the talk from OITE will be particularly useful.
Great, thank you. Lots of people have asked about the slides, and we will make sure that everyone has access to the slides. In terms of the video, you can use the exact same link and come back and watch it, but it will disappear into the World Wide Web when we hit 3,000 views. So it should probably be up for another week. After that, if we need to offer it again, we will. We have a question from a graduate student who just learned very difficult news about their mother and some really scary health issues and health news. She was hoping that you might give a little bit of information about strategies for being there without physically being with her.
Right. That's really scary. I think like that is probably one of the fears we're all having. And it's really scary to have somebody in your family that you love, you know, be unhealthy, especially if you can't be with them. I think, again, we're thinking about our sense of agency in this. And I think probably when someone you love is sick and you can't be there, that sense of helplessness really can kick in. So what can you do? Are you able to FaceTime? Are you able to call? Are there people who are in her area that you could mobilize to support her and give her that support? And then you can check in with them and say, how's she looking? How's mom doing? So you feel like, you know, there's a team around her, and as much as you want to be in that team, if you're not, can you sort of either coordinate that team or communicate with that team virtually? That might be something to sort of give you a sense of agency when you feel particularly helpless, when someone you love is not doing is not as healthy as you wish they were.
Thank you. You know, we tell our students all the time to work hard to solve problems on their own. And so there's a lot of questions here from students about balancing the level of reaching out for help and needing to be independent.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you balance that?
This is a great question.
Yeah.
I think that oftentimes we feel the most like we have to be independent and deal with things, particularly when we feel like our perfectionism kicking in. So we feel like, okay, I have to do things and I have to do them well. And if I tell other people that I'm not doing them well, then I might get judged, or I might get a slap on the wrist, or I might feel vulnerable. So I would say I would start with somebody that you really trust, that you know has in the past had positive reactions to reaching out for help, and start with them and see what their reaction is. And you can even say, I was thinking about talking to so-and-so, and they might say, that's a great idea, or I don't know, how did they react in the past? So thinking about who you can reach out to and who you feel like you can be vulnerable with and get help from, without feeling worried about that judgment, and starting there. And also, you know, if you're feeling overwhelmed, like you need help, my guess is you are not alone, and most people are feeling like that. So starting with somebody that you trust, I think is a good way to balance it at first.
Great, thank you. Can you address whether making a work schedule and routine, following a routine helps, or whether you can get caught in being so rigid about your schedule that it actually doesn't help?
Right. I think both, yes. Both, yes. They both are true. You can make a work schedule if that's what works for you. If you look at your work schedule and you feel soothed by that and you think, wow, this is, you know, useful to me, use one. If you look at your work schedule and you immediately feel guilty and overwhelmed, that's an indicator to you that maybe you either need to use it and think to yourself, okay, if I get 50% of this done today, that's okay. If you feel like this is just too overwhelming to me and I can't do this with my kids or my spouse, or then those are both possibilities. You have to sort of make the decision about how you feel when you think about that schedule.
Yeah, somebody was talking to me the other day and they said, I'm going to make a schedule-ish and stick to it-ish. And I thought, oh, I'm going to borrow that, right? Because it means I'm going to add some structure and I'm going to be kind to myself when I can't hold that structure. And maybe that's a good thing to keep in mind, just schedule-ish.
Yeah, that's a great idea. There's a children's book called Ish. If you have
Oh, is
kids,
there?
yep, and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. A couple of students are asking about pointing out that they spend a lot of time in that numbing zone that you talked about, and they actually have the self-awareness to appreciate that it makes them feel worse. And they're hoping that you can provide some strategies to use to move out of that zone.
Right. So I think setting physical timers can be really helpful. So setting a timer and putting it across the room if you're sitting in your bed watching Netflix, physically doing that, planning a walk or a call with somebody and having a date or deadline, we're going to go for a walk. I've been doing virtual walks with my family, and we're going to go for a virtual walk together at this time. So setting things that sort of force you to shift, to transition, because transition is really tough, and going from one activity to another, transition, is actually housed in our prefrontal cortex. And if we, again, the more stress we're feeling, the less our prefrontal cortex is online. So then it's harder to initiate new tasks and it's harder to transition. So if you can set a actual a date or a shift or a change or a meeting at that time, then that can be really helpful to shift and to transition. And also being kind to yourself. If you say, today I watched too much Netflix, I'm going to try better tomorrow. I want to feel better tomorrow. So tomorrow I'm going to do something differently.
Thanks. What if you're a physical person and it's making you really crazy and anxious to not be able to shake hands, hug other people?
Right. That's really tough. I wonder about, like sensory pressure in other ways. So some of it is human to human contact. There's not a replacement for that. But like if there's other sensory things like weighted blankets or heavy sweaters or petting animals that you could sort of do in between, and knowing that this is flawed and that this time will end, that can be really hard not to be physical. And I think most scientists are probably community thinkers of thinking about like the intent and the reason that we're not doing that for a little while, that it's not, people are not touching you, or that you're not able to touch people for any personal reason other than like we're trying to keep our community safe.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll just add, not that it helps specifically with hugging or touching, but I'm also an incredibly physical person. And this morning I did 10, 20, 30s when I was running. So 10 seconds of all out, 20 seconds of a sort of push pace, 30 of a easier one. And I was so depleted by those quick 10-second all outs that I felt a whole lot of that sort of kinesthetic physical pressure decrease. So something like that might help.
Yeah.
There's some questions here about navigating independent academic research and so balancing the stress of work just with the stress of living alone and being very, very far away from family.
So stress is cumulative. So it's not like we have A stress and B stress, right? Stress becomes cumulative. So figuring out, one, where do you feel stressed, and sort of meeting those with strategies, right? So if you're feeling really stressed about work, are there ways to sort of assist with that? People to talk to, ways that you manage work stress, and also feeling alone, then feeling away from family, are there ways to connect, right? The difference between physical and social isolation. So can you be a little bit kinder to yourself, knowing that the stress is cumulative in this period? In a way, it's not like, oh, I just have this one new stressor, right? Stress is compounding on each other.
Great, thank you. Some questions about advice for staying active when you're used to exercising outside or at the gym. I guess I'll just answer that quickly and say that there are times in the day when it's pretty easy to keep healthy distance from people and still get some exercise. And there are amazing online resources for workouts. And so that's probably the best bet on that. Lori, add anything if you have something else.
No, I think that's great.
Here's one would be great if you could answer: student having a hard time being productive because graduation is essentially now indefinitely on hold. And how do you stay motivated when your future is so uncertain? Yeah,
that's tricky. So we talked about changing our definition of productivity, right? What is that? What does productivity look like in this time period? I think that motivation is, again, housed in the prefrontal cortex. So when we're stressed out and we're sad and we're overwhelmed emotionally, it's going to be harder. So know that just even the way the brain works, that your motivation is just inherently going to be lower because of that. Sometimes it can be helpful to write down sort of what it was that your long-term goals were, knowing that they're postponed, they're not canceled oftentimes, or sometimes some things are canceled, but your long-term goals, and thinking about, like, maybe you have a little bit more time, maybe you do a little bit less every day, but sort of maybe take a half an hour, do the research that you were intending to do, and then afterwards check in with yourself and say, do I feel better or worse now? And I think oftentimes we'll feel better, and those little successes and our changing definitions of productivity will lead to more little successes. Those little successes help a lot with motivation.
I think also I would encourage students in that situation to talk with both program directors and people on their committee, thesis advisors, because I mean, I know we're only 10 days or so into this, but a couple students at NIH who said, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to finish, after talking with their committees and after talking with program directors, have really developed some strategies for moving forward. So it doesn't, like, the word indefinite is just so hard, right? And once you have a discussion, maybe that word can be changed. And so I would encourage you to reach out to people at your organization who you know in the past have been supportive and helpful for you, and get their advice on that. Somebody pointed out how scientists are used to being in service to the community, used to teaching and being out there doing important work in their lab, and now it's this feeling of I'm not helping at all. And whether we were aware of any opportunities for volunteering. And I will make sure that we email out to this group. There's a set of websites that have a lot of virtual volunteer activities that you can do. You also can call, I know you're spread all over the United States, you can call your state health department or county health department, and they may have opportunities. Lots of our fellows here at NIH are now doing online tutoring because lots of kids are looking for mentors. And so also the National Institute of General Medical Science, if you go to their website, they are putting together some online mentoring tools, and you might be able to help a student at another educational level learn something about science. I am really looking here and seeing that the questions are, well, there's really a lot of them. A couple of them relate to things about staying productive during telework, talking with PIs, keeping science moving, and I'm not going to address any of those on today because next week's Becoming a Resilient Scientist will really cover all of that. How to talk to your PI, if your PI is unavailable, how to try to get some support. I'll be addressing a lot of issues about resilience during telework. And so I'm not going to take any of those right now. Also, there are a lot of questions about accessing the video, and I thought I said it, but maybe I haven't, is you use the same registration link to watch the recording, okay? But the recording will expire at 3,000, so I suggest checking back in the next week. I guess I want to end with this one question, and that is that everyone's saying use this time to write manuscripts, you know, based on things you did earlier. And if you are at an early stage in your work in the lab, or you hit a bump, or you weren't especially motivated right before this, now not only are you worried about right now, but you're like ruminating about missed opportunities in the past. And so I wonder, Lori, if you could address ruminations a little bit and how to deal with that.
Yeah. So we talked about those unhelpful thoughts, the automatic negative thoughts. We did not actually include rumination, but that is one of the types of unhelpful thoughts that we also think about going over and over and over again in our minds about that past. And it often comes down to what can we control? So we cannot, and how helpful is it to be thinking like this? And is there a different way to sort of shift those thoughts? So instead of saying, I should have done this, I can't believe it, now I have nothing to do, what if it was something like a more realistic thought might sound like, actually, how was I supposed to know that a global pandemic was gonna come and shut everything down? There's no precedent for this. And then how does that sort of shift your out of rumination? The other thing with rumination is also if you can do something different with your body. So if you're ruminating, can you say, okay, like I notice I'm ruminating right now. Can you do something distracting? Can you do something sensorily challenged, sensorily different from that? And if you're worried, like Sharon said, I think that the talk that she's giving next week, something to think about, how to talk to your PI about those concerns.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori, and thank you to all of you for coming and staying and listening, and your questions were really outstanding in making us think about the resources we need to help put together for the coming sessions that we have. Our goal is to webinar at least one session a week and possibly more. All of the information will be emailed out to program directors through various listservs. Feel free to forward them to your friends, anyone that you think would benefit. I know that sometimes the NIH just seems like this sort of big, giant bureaucracy where you can't get anyone to pick up the phone and you just want an answer, and instead you have to read like 20 pages of really dense government speak. I know we sometimes don't seem like there's people, but there really are lots of people and lots of people who care about you. At leadership meetings where Dr. Collins is there, we often talk about our concern for trainees during this period and making sure that the scientific enterprise supports you so that you can be resilient during this time and come back and do all the great things that you're hoping to do. And I hope that over time, you see that in our actions, in changing deadlines and helping you navigate all of this. Please keep communicating with us. You can always email me. That's milgrams@nih.gov, and I will make sure that the NIH coronavirus team hears what your concerns are. We really care about you, and I wish you all the best. And please stay healthy and stay home and wash your hands. Thank you all very much. And Lori, I realize I don't know how to shut this.
Okay, I think I can do it.
Do you know how to do it?